Are you concerned about all this corruption being misgendered as conspiracies? Well, don't you worry. Sit back, relax, and join in the conversation as we talk with today's guest. Welcome to another LSB Film Productions podcast with your host, Chris Brooks.
Hello and welcome to the channel. This is a quick podcast that we thought we'd put together because the time seems correct. And we're basically going to look at the merits of protesting and petitions. Is it great to get your voices out there and heard? Are you demanding that you're heard, or is it just falling on deaf ears because the system is rigged like that? So we're going to look through some evidence and have a bit of an evidence-based chat with the wonderful Clive Edwards. And welcome back to the show, Clive.
Hi, Chris. Good to be back. And given the recent huge petition that's just been flying about the internet, that's reached over 3 million signatories, I thought would be a really good point to analyze and evidence and have a look at what actually it means from a citizen's point of view to petition government and to protest. Because I think, like you mentioned, like at the moment there's huge protests with farmers, and there's on the February the 1st down in London there's another huge protest about free speech and being planned. So I think the timing of this is apt, and I think it's a very important aspect of law and governance to dig into. And actually, I'm doing it for selfish reasons, so I can refer back to this at a later date when anyone asks about petition and protests. So
it's all good. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's good to get the information out there, and it is good to have the link to say, here, I'll watch this.
Exactly, yeah. So I would encourage, actually, for people that are arguing with, online about whether protests or petitions got any validity or whether it's not a worthwhile legal exercise, then please do link to this and share it about in your groups, because it's packed with evidence and information. So let's look at the legal merits of protesting and petitioning. And as I say, there's been a recent general huge petition of over 3 million signatories just gone about, and that was to call for a general election. So I think by the end of this, we will know definitively whether protest and petition A is any good, and B, you probably won't get a better example to examine than a 3 million petitions. It reached 3 million in about a month. It broke some records, I think, for how quick it got.
To be fair, I think it hit about nearly 3 million in about a week, didn't it?
Yeah,
and then it's just kind of slowed down a little bit since then, but initially it's done really, really well.
So for this examination on the legal merits of protest and petition, I don't think we could probably get a better example of. So the public literally want to hold the government to account. They want to call another snap general election, and there's over 3 million people who petition Parliament, and Parliament has to activate a debate in when a petition reaches over 100,000. Well, this smashed that in, like you say, a week, 2 weeks. So if ever there was going to be an example of a petition holding government to account, surely it would be this one. So let's have a look at it. Yeah. So there's the evidence, of over 3 million signatories. And so I thought the first thing we need to look at is who can petition in protest. And it says here on the government side that I should point out to your audience, again, we've put a web page together for this discussion where you can follow along and see the links and acts of Parliament and the screenshots. So you can follow along the discussion, and that is at capillarywave.com/LSB4.
Links will be in the video description as always.
Yes, so please do follow along. And so here I've got a screenshot on the webpage of how petitions work from the government's website, and it very clearly states that petitions are can only be signed by British citizens and UK residents. So that there is clear evidence of who can sign these petitions, and to be in a position to be able to sign a petition, you have to be on the electoral register. That is what makes you a subject of the state, and that's what makes you a British citizen or UK resident. So only persons on the electoral register who therefore have consented to be governed can legally sign anyway, a petition. And So I thought I'd have a look at some acts of parliament that enshrine that legal right for citizens to hold a protest and to petition government. And it's the Claim of Right Act 1689. Again, there's a screenshot here with a link to the act itself, which just states in law that it's the privilege, it is the right and privilege of the subjects to protest, to be able to protest. So again, that's telling us that you have to be a subject to be in a position to protest, and that is a right. And that right is given by the authority. So we'll get into rights, I'm sure, a bit later on in this discussion. And so that's where the citizen's right to protest is evidenced. And this is where the citizen's right to petition is evidenced. And that is in the Bill of Rights Act 1688. Again, there's a screenshot there and a link to the act itself. And again, it states it's the right of the subjects to petition the king. So again, it's using practically the exact same words. It's a citizen's right, a subject's right to be able to petition the king. So I just wanted to just make that, because I've had it said to me that no, anyone can sign a petition. That's not true. It only applies to subjects of the king, British citizens and UK residents, and you become those things when via the acts of enrolling on the electoral register and voting. So I wanted to make that very clear from the outset. So, like obviously, clearly, if it's only and specifically applies to subjects, then it would be wise to have a look at what a subject is. And a subject, the definition there I've put on the webpage, is a person. So again, it's telling us now what a subject is and what a UK you are a person, and that's a very specific status at law. So a subject is a person under control and dominion of another. So you're under the control. If you're a UK citizen, you're under the control and dominion of another. And this is really important, as we'll evidence as we go on through this. So I'll just go on a little bit further now. A subject is one who owes allegiance to government. So once you enroll on that electoral register, you owe an allegiance to government. And allegiance comes from the word liege. Exactly, yeah, under the thumb, completely under the thumb. This definition will explain a lot as we go on, and it will be backed up by other definitions and other means as we explain the right to petition and protest. So allegiance, you get the word liege from allegiance. It's a synonymous word, and a liege is a vassal of a feudal lord. So let that sink in, because
no pun intended.
This will be evidenced further as we go through this. But a liege is a vassal of a feudal lord. It's telling you're in a feudal system, and this will be evidenced again later on. So your citizens is bound also to render feudal allegiance and service. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about being a subject and a UK citizen. And I think really in people's hearts of hearts, if they're honest with themselves, they'll kind of know that anyway. They'll know it's not a very a position of much authority when you're petitioning and protesting. So, and it also creates an obligation. And again, this is I've evidenced this on the associated webpage. So, being a subject makes you a liege, which is a vassal of a feudal lord, and it creates an obligation, which is an obligation is a binding promise by law. So, when people say, I haven't given my consent to be governed, and but they're on the electoral roll, there's evidence of a binding promise, and you're bound by law. And that evidence is that legal name on the electoral register. So it's the electoral register that kicks a lot of this off for citizens. And that's how you become, that is how you enter into the consent of the governed. Most people have heard that phrase, the consent of the governed. We'll touch on that a little bit in this discussion as well. So that is what a subject is. And then when you become a subject, a lot of people don't know this, but you get a new rank in the society and a new role, and a new rank and title. So the rank you become is a commoner. So when you become on the electoral register and then you vote and send your MP, you send someone to Parliament to represent you. You then become what is known as a commoner at law, and you're called a commoner because you belong to the House of Commons. That's why you're known as a commoner. And again, it's that feudal system under a lord.
Which is where common law comes in as well, I guess. Commoner.
Common law is the law for the commoners. Yeah, that's why it's called common law. I won't touch on that because I've spoke about that in other podcasts. So yeah, that's why you're known as a commoner at law, and a commoner is a member of the third estate of the realm. So this is also important. So we're going to touch on some of these things we explain here. Will really drive home your status in relation to government and in relation to the king and in relation to the law. All these things are vital. If you're trying to hold a government to account, whether it's farmers fighting the inheritance tax or people fighting 5G towers, and maybe I know there's groups that are fighting illegal immigration camps, especially in Ireland, that are popping up in towns and villages. You understanding what we're talking about today will put you in a better position to actually effectively fight the government. And fight, I use that in quotes, I don't mean physically fight, I mean
metaphorically.
Metaphorically, yeah. So understanding this is vitally important. So when you become a commoner, you are a member of the third estate of the realm, because that's what a commoner is. I've evidenced this in many of my articles on the website, and I explain it in great detail there. And so you're a third-class citizen. That is, so you're not even, you hear most people say, oh, I'll get treated like a second-class citizen. You're not a second-class citizen. You're a third-class citizen. You're about as low as it can go in the hierarchy of law and governance, which we'll touch on in a minute. So your chosen rank is commoner, and your title is Mr. or Mrs. And this isn't that Mr. and Mrs. is an abbreviation for master. And so is Messrs. And Ms. And all of these are title abbreviations for the word master. So you're a master because you're a lawmaker, because you're a member of the body of Parliament, which makes the laws, enacts at Parliament. You're a member of the House of Commons. So you're a member of the lawmaking structure of society. So you are a master, but you're also a servant, because you have to abide by those laws that you make. And that is why if you break those laws as a master, a Mr. or Mrs., you'll end up at magistrate's court. And a magistrate means master as well. So magistrate's court is a master's court to deal with the masters who broke the legislation that they themselves have enacted. So again, this is important. This is like a circular thing that this discussion will evidence a bit further. So let's have a look at the citizens' position in governance. Now, I've done a drawing here. It's not the best drawing. I'm no, I was going to say I'm no Rolf Harris, and that's quite a good thing.
Well, just bloody hope you're not.
Yeah.
No, then.
So anyway, there's a drawing here of the citizens' position in governance. And as you can see, it's just a rough outline, obviously, and that just gives you a visual description of how things work in the state. And this applies across the Western-speaking world. God is at the top, and that's evidenced in legislation itself by, I mention it often, the Confession of Faith Ratification Act, 1560. That states that the Bible is the infallible truth, and infallible means exempt from error in knowledge, opinion, and judgment. So God is at the top, whether you're an atheist or not. And obviously, some of these definitions for an atheist will be quite interesting. That being a liege and a subject, it means you're under a lord. You might not be under the Lord God because you chose another lord, but that's another subject for another day. But so God's at the top. Then you obviously you've got the Holy Scriptures, which is the law for God's people. So that's the law they're under. Then you've got the crown, the monarch, and then the government. And there should be another little level there, and that'll be the Acts of Parliament. And commoners, persons, the electorate, UK residents, British citizens, subjects, they'll all be under Acts of Parliament, which is just common sense, isn't it, really, I think? So that's all, that diagram there, which I've done, that's all evidence throughout the law of the land. Throughout Parliament, throughout the King in his coronation, that all these things are evidence. The start of the legal year, where judges go to Westminster Abbey to swear, give praise to God. That happens every year. All the highest officials in the judiciary. So anyway, we touched on that in another podcast. So I won't get too much into that now. But it's important to, when we're looking at, so we've looked at who can sign a petition. We've looked at where those rights come from, which are enshrined in the Acts of Parliament. And now we're looking at the hierarchy of law and governance. So Again, a commoner is a third-class citizen, and rightly so. They're at the bottom of the pile. So it's just sort of depicted there. So now I've called this chapter Up and Down, to suffer and protest. And this is why most people will understand, like, lawyers and words are very important, and they can be quite tricky. And if you don't know the meaning of words, you can get caught out.
So this is like where you go into legalese and
some people call it legalese. I don't. It's just word definitions, and knowing word definitions is very important. So a good one that I like to use is words have two meanings in a lot of cases, and a classic is suffer. So suffer means, most people, if I was to say Chris suffered a punch in the face from Clive, now that suffer also means allowed to happen. You allowed it. And I've evidenced that in the definition here. I've hyperlinked the word suffer, so you can go and check for yourself. But suffer means to allow. It also means to have something happen to you, but it also means the opposite. So you've got to be careful with words, and none more so than petition and protest, as we'll go on to find out now. So just like suffer has two polar opposite meanings, most people think the word protest is to turn up, shout, and oppose and deny. That is not true. It actually means to approve, publicly declare, beg, as I've evidenced here. So let's have a look. It's it's a pledge, a solemn declaration. A protest is a pledge. Oh, so synonymous words are also very important in law. So the first synonymous word for protest is avowal. And avow, as I've evidenced here, means to uphold, support, approve, stand by, back up. So when you're protesting, just to be clear, you approve, you uphold, and you support. Which kind of makes sense, really, if you think about it, because you're a commoner. A subject is a commoner, and you've made these rules. So when you've
essentially made the rod for your own back. And now you're
exactly.
asking to not have such a heavy weight on your back that you.
That's exactly the rod for your own back is a brilliant definition, a brilliant, succinct way of putting it, because that's exactly true. Absolutely couldn't be truer. So we'll move on to petition, and a petition is a supplication or prayer. Again, this is important for atheists. Like these are serious positions at law. That is what petition means. You're praying to your feudal lord. Like, these aren't just definitions I've plucked out of the air. This is how the system of governance works. You're either under the Lord God or you're under a feudal lord. And I've written an article that puts the atheist position in a totally different perspective than you'll hear from Kristofer Hitchens, Stephen Fry and the likes, and
Hawkins,
Richard Dawkins. Yeah. My article is called The Atheist Delusion, and it'll give a totally different perspective on the atheist position at law. The very fact that though people have declared themselves an atheist means they can only ever be a third-class citizen. They can never, ever escape that third-class citizenship. So they will forever be in servitude under a feudal lord. And I think that's a very important distinction, and something all atheists should consider at the very least. So a petition is a supplication, and it's supplication means to beg, plea, and it's a public prayer, praying in public. So when you're petitioning, you're praying in public. So which it would do if you're in a feudal system. Again, it's just sort of everything backs it up. So that being said, and just some of the things we touched on here so far, there's much more to get into, but that would all be correct. That the government response, which I've evidenced here from a screenshot, and I've given the source as well from that petition. The government response is: this government was elected on a mandate of change at the July 24 election. Our full focus is on fixing the foundations, rebuilding Britain, and restoring public confidence. In other words, like, no. The answer is no. Computer says no. 3 million people. So the biggest, fastest growing petition in recent history has just been blown out of the water. Like, it's hardly warranted in even. It's not even an argument put forward. It's just like, go away.
Yeah.
which it would be if you're a third-class citizen making a public prayer and showing. So there's 3 million people who signed that petition have showed their public support, not disapproval, support
Yeah.
and approval.
There's more people that voted for the petition than there were who've actually voted in Labour.
I think there was 9 million people that voted for Labour. I can't. Yeah,
okay.
And it works out to be about the population of London. But again, I'll touch on this. Everyone that voted, whether you voted Labour, Reform, Tory, Green Party, everyone that voted is on the electoral register.
Yeah.
It's the electoral register that gives the consent. You're allowed to choose between the different coloured denominations. Fine. They're like, yeah, fine, do what you like. Choose which colour you like. Which colour would you like? It's the Punch and Judy show. Choose which. Do you like Punch or do you like Judy? Oh, you like Judy this year. Fine. We'll choose Judy. But you've all consented to also support Punch. And Punch's right to be in the theatre as well. So everyone that is on the electoral roll and voted for reform also by default has given assent, approval for Keir Starmer to be doing what he's doing. It's all evidenced. Yeah. So that is the position there. And so this next sort of chapter is arguing against yourself.
Do that regularly.
Yeah, we touched on it. That obviously, if you're a commoner, you're a third-class citizen. You're a member part of the lawmaking body, the House of Commons. So you enacted. So all these farmers that have been down to London recently, like in their tractors, every one of them that is on the electoral register, every one of them is a subject, which is a feudal. We've explained the feudal system that they're under. They've already consented that they're the governed. They've consented to be governed, and they've elected to be a third-class citizen. They've already agreed to the laws that Labour have enacted. They've agreed to them, and protesting is further support of those laws. Just to be clear, and if that doesn't give the farmers pause for thought, and everyone that's turning up on February the 1st, let me just clarify something. I see nothing wrong in hundreds of thousands of people getting together and showing their support or whatever for whatever cause it may be. The whole point of this is the whole point of my website is to try and get citizens to understand how they're being governed. I support these farmers wholeheartedly. The reason I exist is to try and explain to these farmers how you can go about it better. Don't do it from the position of being a third-class citizen. You're never going to win. You need to change your status. And we'll look at some of the more powerful positions in law and governance. And this, again, I often say it, but this isn't Clive Edwards' opinion on the law. This is all evidence. I'm just showing you what the law says and what your position is in the law. So, again, I'm not against people, and I won't call it protest and petitioning, because obviously that's pointless. If you're a citizen of the state, that is pointless. We'll get onto evidence a bit more about that. But there's nothing wrong with 100,000 people getting together in their tractors and getting down to London and blocking London and saying we're not happy with this and this, that, and the other. But don't do it from the position of a citizen, because all you're doing is showing your approval for the laws which you have enacted. Hopefully, I've explained that. I really hope I've explained that clearly enough so that people can see the futility of protest. And we'll explain I'll give some more evidence as to why it's a very bad idea. So, yeah, arguing against yourself. That is effectively what you're doing. And I've linked here there's a couple of links here from Theresa May explaining police by consent, the Met Police explaining where police could by consent, and the Black Belt Barrister. He explains the consent of the governed. It's a very brief clip, but if you listen carefully, he explains what I'm explaining here in greater detail. It's very rare you get a barrister or to go into too much detail about this, but he briefly explains it, and there's a link of it there. So, being a citizen, we've already touched on, makes you a resident citizen and of a district and a ward. Now, most people, again, they hear these words. You're in a district. Most people are under a district council. They don't give it a second thought because we've just grown up with these terms and phrases. And when you vote in your local elections, you elect an MP, someone to represent you. Like they stand in a ward, at WARD. So you elect someone from a ward and a district. Now, the meanings of these two words just back up exactly what we've already previously evidenced of what a subject is. So a district is evidence that you're under a lord or officer, and they can take and distress personal property. They can withhold it from you. That's what a district is. That is why in the Hunger Games, they're all in districts. Like, this stuff is sort of placed in front of us. So again, that's evidence that the definition of district further backs up what a subject is. It's just reinforcing that feudal system. Most people don't believe they're in a feudal system, but you are. At law, you are, if you're a citizen. So that's what a district is. And a ward, again, is a person. So again, a subject, again, is evidence in that you are a person of the state. And these are very
legal
important.
fiction.
Yeah, being a person is a very important status at law. It's one of the most important words that govern your life, and very few people understand it. And me and you, Chris, have spent over an hour talking about it in one of our previous podcasts. So people can go and find that if they'd like to learn a bit more about what a person is. But here, in the definition of ward, it explains that a person a person over whom a guardian has their property, as ward, govern wardship over a person's property. So again, just like in a district, you've got a lord or officer that is in control of what you believe is your property. It's not your property, and you can check that. I've got a word index at the website where there's a word index linked to property, which is an interesting read. So I've mentioned Danny Beach before, and he's got a website which explains his story, and Danny's story will evidence what happens if the council decide to take your property and you have an MP and you're in a district and a ward. So that's evidence there. Now,
so just really quickly with Danny, is there any recourse for Danny? Is he given how unlawful really that whole situation happened? Is there a way that he can fight back?
No, you just said it's unlawful. Remember what we've just spoken about being a subject and a citizen. This is important. This is important for Danny to understand as well. We've just said that it's an obligation. It's a promise. It's legally binding when you go onto the electoral register. And I've listened to your interviews with Danny, and he explains how he's written to his MP and things like this. So I know.
So it's just more consent.
Yeah, it's just more consent. Danny's begging to his MP. That's what we've. So yeah, the first thing Danny can do is get himself off the electoral register. That's one of the very first things he can do. Then he won't be a third-class citizen anymore. Because as long as your name is on that electoral register, the government has evidence of your contract and your legally binding status as a third-class citizen.
Is it easy enough to come off the electoral roll?
Yeah, there's no form. A lot of people contact me and say, I can't find a form to fill in. Like, they want a government form to write to the government. Stop asking for things. Tell them. That's what a notice is. I've given you notice. That's what a notice is. I serve you notice, Chris, that I don't want to be employed by you anymore, or I serve you notice of this, that. That's what notices are. So just send them notice. You don't wait for approval. If you're, I mean, that's how brainwashed and how subdued and subjected the citizenship are. They want approval, and they want to ask. And if the government turn around to them and say, "Oh, you're not allowed to do that. We don't have a form for that," they'll go away with it, like looking at their shoes. Like, oh dear, I'm not allowed to.
They've done a bloody good number on us, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, they really have. Yeah, they really have. And yeah, they've done a proper number on us. So you don't ask for permission. Just send a notice and say you're withdrawing your consent to be governed. Take that legal name off of the electoral register. You no longer have. I'm revoking, rescinding, whatever words you'd like to use. And we touched on this before, but I'll just mention it here again. There is an office, a guy called an office of state called an attorney general. He is called an attorney general because he is in charge of the attorneys. To attorn, the word attorn means to pledge allegiance to another lord. It means to turn away from one lord and pledge allegiance to another. So again, these atheists, listen to what I'm saying. You've turned away, in fact and in law, from one lord, and you've pledged allegiance to another lord. This is my opinion.
The darker lord.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. That's true. Yeah. So again, these aren't my opinions. That's what's happening in law. And that, again, sadly, that's why atheists have, they're never, because of their position on atheism, they don't understand what the Bible says. They're always going to be a third-class citizen, sadly. And it is, I find it quite sad that that's the case, but that's the position. So we touched on like a subject as a person. We've just explained a bit what the person is a really important word, and we've spoken about it in other podcasts, but again, I'll just briefly mention it here. I've linked a clip from Supreme Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who swears an oath to be no respecter of persons. So, like, the judges that these citizens find themselves before, none of them are respecters of persons. And every one of you that is at court, or most of you, like 99.9% of you that ever go to court, will be at court as a person, subject, citizen of the state in a feudal relationship with a lord under a lord or officer. Like, that's practically undeniable from what we've evidenced so far. I would say anyway, that's what I would put forward. That would be my argument. And the reason that a judge is no respecter of persons, like the words they use in that swearing-in ceremony, is straight out of Job 32:21-22 from the King James Version of the Bible. In my diagram, I've evidenced the hierarchy of law. At the top is God, and then it's the Holy Scriptures. The reason a judge, and all the judges that all of your audience will ever come before, is no respecter of persons, because what it says in the Holy Bible. So that's the reference point there. And I've just pulled out a few quotes and from the Bible, chapters and verses, which the Bible states multiple times, many more than I've evidenced here. Do not become a person. If you do, you transgress the law and commit sin, you're dead to me. And almost all of us go and commit sin. That is why at Matthew, Jesus says, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that commit iniquity. Iniquity means to transgress the law. So that might be interesting to any Christians that are listening. Again, my articles talk about all these things. What we're doing here, discussing petition and protest, just covers so many of my articles where I go into each article basically breaks down a certain subject and area of law and governance. So you will find articles at my website which will dig down a bit more in each of these like chapters we're touching on here. So we've sort of evidenced what the lowest position in law and governance is: a subject citizen in a feudal system, under a feudal relationship, under a lord and officer. I've titled this chapter "The Most Powerful Position in Governance Available," and that is as a people. You will often hear, I see it on Facebook and social media and Twitter. You get people like rabble rousing, like they're trying to, and they're saying things like, we the people need to stand up and take our power back. You gave it away. You've already given it away and consented to the system of governance. You're not a people anymore. And there's an act of parliament that, again, this is legally speaking, because I can't transform what Chris Brooks is from a man to a person. I can't do that.
Some people would argue that.
I can't do that. You can only believe that you go from a people to a person. It's all in the mind. And
so people is a good word. You can use people.
Absolutely it is. But people are claiming themselves to be people. Like, we the people need to go in, like, the people need to meet in Parliament and hold the government to account. None of them there, very few will be there as people. They're all there as citizens of the state with an MP. They're subjects. So they're not people. If more persons understand what we're discussing here, then there'll be more people to be able to properly hold government to account. Not from the status of a third-class citizen, because you can't hold a government to account when you're a vassal of a feudal lord. But you can begin to hold them account, and they'll begin to serve you if you're one of the people. You often hear, you hear it all the time, like, oh, I pay your wages, you're supposed to serve the people. They do serve the people, but you made yourself a citizen. You chose to be a citizen, a third-class citizen of the state, in a feudal relationship with a lord and officer. What rights do you think you've got? The only rights you have are what your officer and lord deem to give you.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go around, don't go around calling yourself a people if you're not a people. If you've got an MP and you're on the electoral register, you are not one of the people. And this is what I hope these podcasts can achieve. We need more people.
So
I'm one of the people.
I mean, I understand about the getting off the electric roll or whatever it was called.
Electoral register, yeah.
That's it. But say you've done that. So say, right, I'm off the electoral roll now. How do you then voice yourself as a people and not a person?
Well,
Because surely you still
let's
need to contact
yeah,
those
you're going to
in
be
authority.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Those in authority, like we're going to get onto evidence in a minute, like how that works throughout state, from the king right down to your local council. What we're talking about is evidence throughout all of state. Everyone that if you're a citizen, every agency of government, you see the king does a speech at Christmas, and you might come before a judge, and you might have had a run-in with the police, or they pulled you over on the motorway, and also your local council. So everyone that has an effect over your life and can tell you what you can and cannot do. I'm going to provide some evidence, or my articles provide lots of evidence of how what we're talking about, the people and the persons, is evidence throughout state. So you're right. So yeah, it's a good question. Like, what we've already spoke about, the first thing that you need to do is get off the electoral register if you want to be one of the people. If you don't, if you want to be in a feudal system under a lord or officer who can take and distress your personal property at any time, you're welcome to it. It's not from me. So we've already just spoke about the Attorney General and what in serving notice, and you're right. Most people are then they think, oh yeah, what do I do now? We've been governed so hard for so long, for so many generations. The people, there aren't any people, and when you become a people again, they don't know what to do. You're gonna have to give it some thought and maybe read up on a few things. You know what I mean? But I can't tell you what to do, and that's why government exists, to tell you exactly what to do. From the minute you get up to the minute you go back to bed, they rule your life. Tell you what you can do, how long you can work, everything. So yeah. So the next chapter is people versus persons, and I'll just mention I've spoken at length about the 2 tiers of state on Richard Bobes' podcast, so I've linked that there. And people versus persons, I've done another drawing here which just briefly visually describes the two jurisdictions, because if you're a person, you're in one jurisdiction under mankind, under man's governance. So you get man telling you what to do, mankind, do this, do that, do this, do that. When you're one of the people, you're under the rules and jurisdiction of God. And that's commonly found in the Bible. And the Crown have given you a Bible. They said, if you're going to quote the Bible at us, because when you get to court, if you're one of the persons that decides, no, I think I'm going to be one of the people now, and if you find yourself at court, you can't rely on the Acts of Parliament, because that's for persons. So the Crown said, if you're going to quote the Bible at us, you're going to need to quote the King James Version 1611, because there are thousands of versions of Bible out there, and all of them say something different because of copyright laws. And again, I've just gone into that in some detail in an article called like Christians, Have You Been Deceived? Because in the Bible it says, do not alter one jot or tittle from these words. That's what the Bible says. And man's copyright law says you have to alter them. So there's thousands different. It's
like a mass case of Chinese whisper.
Oh, you nailed it. It's really bad. And that is why a lot of Christians do not understand what I'm talking about. A lot of Christians listening to this will not understand the concepts of what I'm talking about. The very people who should be under God in the Holy Scriptures, who should be a people and not persons, because that breaks one of the commandments, have no other gods before me. Right? The very people who should understand this, because they read some of these new versions of the Bible where a lot of these key chapters and verses have been taken out, they don't understand it. And most of them don't. Most Christians, if you know any Christians, ask them if they read a King James Bible, like the authorized version, 1611.
Well, you know, Christians don't understand it because during the height of COVID, when it was, oh, you can't come to church unless you've had a you know what. Well, absolutely, that kind of tells you all you need to know, doesn't it?
That I agree.
Governed.
Yeah, there's one pastor that I know of in Canada, Pastor James Coates. He made a stand and he kept his church open. And they put him in prison for it. And I wrote to the guy because I admire his stance, and even he doesn't understand what I'm talking about here. And my article, Government versus God, I've written that, and it features the case of Pastor James Coates, because he was a pastor trying to do the right thing by his flock, and he was put inside because he's a citizen of the state. Sadly, he doesn't understand that position, that third-class citizen status. So, so I've evidenced that in an article called Government versus God. And that's what it is. You're either under government or you're under God. There are no other jurisdictions you could be under. So everyone's got to make their mind up. Like, what do you want to be? What lord do you want to be under? Do you want to be a feudal vassal of a lord or officer of the crown? Because that's what citizens are, who can take and distress personal property at will, as we've evidenced with the Danny Beach case there. Or you can be under a different lord, the Lord God. And in
Divine
the Bible,
law.
it says, exactly, the royal law. And in the Bible, it says, like Jesus says, my yoke is light. A yoke is what you put on cattle to plow fields. And it says you can be under my yoke. It's a light yoke. And I don't ask much of you. I ask you to love your neighbor. So that's something to think about. The people in person. So we've sort of touched on their positions throughout the state through the king. Have I got to that yet? Have we mentioned the king and the police?
I don't think so, but I am just dubious of time.
Right, yeah. So let me fast forward. So the web page will evidence that. You'll find the two persons of state. I'll just briefly say a king wears two crowns. One crown is for the god, and another crown is the imperial crown to rule over persons. Judges swear two oaths.
We talked on that on the last podcast, didn't we?
We did, yeah. So it just evidences throughout state. Police even have two oaths, have two positions. A policeman, policewoman have two offices of state. One is under God, and he's there to protect people as a constable. And the other is an officer of the United Kingdom who is there to enforce policy against citizens, these third-class citizens. The police are there to run around and beat up all these citizens that don't understand what protest and petition means. That's what they're there for.
Absolutely.
To enforce policy. So I've evidenced that. I've evidenced the people in person situation in a local council's constitution, which again we touched on the last podcast. But I want this to be a go-to reference point on all things people, persons, and petition and protest. So it's going to be a useful addition to this chat, where a council's constitution evidences everything we've just spoke about. It talks about the people and the electorate. And if you're one of the electorate, I mean, clues in the word, the electorate, you've elected to be under Parliament, the Acts of Parliament, with MPs, the whole
governed
system.
over.
Yeah, that's the consent of the governed. And local councils have got a duty towards the people and the electorate. And they rule over the electorate and not the people. So that's evidence there. So, yeah. Well, we're basically done. I know you're stretched for time, but so the conclusion is self-evident from what we've spoken about. If you are a citizen, subject, commoner of a state, and this applies to Australia, Canada, across the Commonwealth, you're in no position to hold anyone to account. And protest is just an affirmation. It's an approval. And so is petitioning, which is a public prayer to a deity. So that is what those mean. That is what those words mean. And it's so these 3 million people that signed that petition, hopefully some of them get to see this and understand, if they really want to truly hold the government to account, then you need to get off the electoral register. Like, that's the first thing you need to do if you don't want to be I mean, I'd like to hear from some of the farmers. I'd love some feedback. Some of these farmers that are protesting government. I'd love it for some of your audience to share this this discussion about protest and petition in some of these groups, these 5G groups that I've been a member of. Like, it's essential viewing and to understand what protest and petition means and what your position in governance is. At law, you're bound at law to be a third-class citizen. So you're not going to be holding anyone to account from the position of a commoner. Just to finish, to highlight what we've spoken about there's persons out there that think they're people. And so the last petition I've highlighted here, and I've called it Commoners Who Think They're People, and they've petitioned government, and it says, "We the people hereby withdraw our consent to be governed or policed." This petition was rejected. And I'll end on that note, if you like.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your knowledge and wisdom on that. I hope everyone watching this has taken some nuggets of truth from it. Please do check out the Capillary Wave. The link will be in the description. If you want to find out more about the work that Clive is doing, it's fascinating work. I've had the privilege to look at the work that he's done on the website, become a member, and take back your own control. But yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Great to chat with you.
Brilliant. All the best. Speak to you again soon.